Why we snap judge some people as boring. According to recent research, people have many preconceptions of what features make up a stereotypical bore. Like other types of stereotyping, these biases may not be objectively true, but they come with extremely negative consequences. People judge those who match boring stereotypes harshly, considering them less competent and warm than the average person, and unfairly shunning them in social interactions before they have even opened their mouths. They're marginalised, says Wijnand van Tilburg, an experimental social psychologist at the University of Essex, UK, who led the recent research. By entering an encounter with unduly negative expectations, you may end up missing out on a potentially enjoyable conversation, whereas a more open mind might allow a budding friendship to blossom. The research can also offer some tips for making a better first impression of yourself. Van Tilburg's research builds on more than 2 decades of scientific interest in people's experiences of boredom. This research has shown it is one of our most excruciating emotions, with a surprisingly profound influence on our behaviour. Unfortunately, humans have an annoying tendency to unfairly prejudge people based on incomplete information. And this means that we will often decide that someone is going to be a bore before they have even had a chance to spark our interest. Story. It's not my story. I want you to imagine you are in this story. Imagine you are going to a party. Let's say it's your friend's party. You arrive at your friend's house and you're quite excited. You don't know most of the people there at the party. Most of the people are strangers. But that's okay, because you want to make some new friends. The party's quite busy. There is music, there's food, and you sit down on the sofa, and beside you, you see a lady. You introduce yourself. Hello, you say, and then the lady replies, hello, my name is Jane. And you say, hello, Jane. What do you do? What's your job? Jane replies, oh, I work in a bank. Now, at this point in the conversation, what are you thinking? Do you think Jane is a really interesting, exciting, fun person? No, probably not. Jane works in a bank, so you probably think she's quite boring. She's not interesting. But you have guessed this just because she works in a bank. Just on this one piece of information, you probably think Jane is going to be boring and uninteresting. You don't really want to talk to her. So let's say you make an excuse. You say something like, oh, I'm sorry, Jane, but I need to go and find my friend. I think my friend is lost. And then you stand up and you walk to the other side of the room. Good. You've escaped. Boring Jane cannot see you now, so you decide that you want to talk to someone else, someone interesting, someone fun. You need to find someone new to talk to. So imagine now you talk to a different lady. You say, hello. And then this lady says, hello, my name is Alice. And you say, oh, nice to meet you, Alice. What do you do? What's your job? And Alice says, I'm a video game designer. Wow, so cool. You really want to talk to Alice. She must be so interesting. You have decided Alice is really interesting, just from one piece of information, her job. Now, just wait a second. What have you just done? You have formed an opinion about two different people just from a very limited amount of information, just from one simple fact. Actually, this is quite common. It's quite normal. We do this all the time. We judge people on small, single pieces of information. And as we learn from today's article, this is not a good thing. Now let's think about our two imaginary characters again. Exciting Alice, the video game designer, and boring banker Jane. Actually, Jane, the lady who works in a bank, might be really interesting. She might be able to tell you really cool things, such as the easiest way to rob a bank, the fastest way to make $1 million. She might have a really cool hobby, such as writing. Maybe in her spare time she writes novels. Maybe she speaks 10 foreign languages. Maybe she's visited 50 different countries. Maybe. But you will never know, because you have already decided she is boring, she's uninteresting, and you left her on the sofa. So now you're talking to interesting Alice, the video game designer. But there's a small problem. Alice isn't interesting at all. She's boring. She tells you that she doesn't even like her job. She doesn't like talking about video games or video game designing. Okay, so Alice, tell me about your hobbies. Oh, says Alice, I don't have any hobbies. I just work and sleep. So actually, Alice is very boring. So what can you do? You can go to find Jane, who works in the bank. But you probably can't now, because she has found other friends. She's talking to other people. You have lost the opportunity to have an interesting conversation with Jane. You can see what's happened in this imaginary party. It's something we do in our everyday lives. We decide who is boring, who is interesting, just on small pieces of information. So what should we do in this situation? Well, let's imagine the party again. You arrive, you sit down on the sofa and you start talking to Jane. Instead of asking her the very boring question of what's your job, imagine there's a bookshelf in the room. Imagine you say, oh, look, there's lots of books on the bookshelf here. Have you read any good books recently? And now imagine Jane's answer. She'll say something like, actually, I'm a writer in my spare time. I'm trying to write my own book. It's a novel. And now you can imagine how the conversation might develop from there. It's going to be quite interesting, I think. Now imagine if you ask the same question to our friend Alice, the video game designer. She would probably reply with something like, oh, I don't read books. I don't like reading. So when we meet new people, it's really important to ask the right questions, to allow conversations to grow and to allow the conversation to develop before we decide if the person is interesting or boring. And that's really the background to today's article. Before we look at the article, let's have a look at some vocabulary. Number 1, snap judge. Now this word, snap, we can use this word before a verb, before a noun, to mean that we do something suddenly, without thinking, without preparation. So if we snap judge something, we make an opinion of that thing without thinking carefully about it. The most common way to use snap in this way is together with the word decision. A snap decision. It's when you decide something without thinking carefully. For example, he always makes snap decisions and never thinks about the consequences. Or I might give you some advice. Look, go away and think about it. There's no need to make a snap decision. Number 2, preconception. A preconception is an idea or an opinion that we form before we have enough information. So we often form that opinion incorrectly. When we meet new people, we should try to do so without too many preconceptions. Before meeting someone for the first time, you must try to ignore any preconceptions you may have about them. Number 3, stereotypical. Stereotypical is the adjective that comes from the noun stereotype. A stereotype is a set idea that people have about what someone or something is like, especially an idea that is wrong. So, for example, a common stereotype of an American is someone who is loud and arrogant. I might say, she's a stereotypical English woman. She drinks tea in the garden and is very polite. Number 4, biases. A bias is a kind of attitude that you have. It makes you see someone in a way that is unfair or different from the way that you see or treat other people. In everyday speech, it's easier to use the adjective biased. I might say, the company is very biased. They employ more men than women. So the company is biased against women. The company's pay system is also very biased. Women get lower salaries than men. So this company is biased against women. Number 5, shun. If you shun something, you avoid that thing because you don't like it or you don't want to do it. If you shun someone or something, you deliberately avoid them. I might say, after she became famous, she shunned the media. She avoided the media. Even though she is rich, she shuns all kinds of luxury items. She prefers a simple life. So she avoids luxury items, luxury things. Number 6, unduly. Unduly is the adverb form of the adjective undue. If you do something that is unduly, you do it in a way that is more than needed, more than necessary, too much. The most common way to use this word is together with the word pressure. Undue pressure, meaning too much pressure. So I might say, you shouldn't give yourself undue pressure at exam time. You should take it easy, have a rest. Teachers often give their students undue pressure, and this can have negative effects. So the most common way to use it is the adjective form undue with the noun pressure. Undue pressure, unnecessary pressure. Number 7, budding. If something is budding, it is developing. It is starting to look good, starting to look positive. If something is budding, we can see that it is starting to be successful. We often use this word to describe people who are starting a new career, often a creative career. So we might say, the short story competition is designed to encourage budding authors. So a budding author is a young person beginning their career as an author. The concert includes performances by budding musicians. Number 8, to blossom. The verb to blossom means to have flowers. When a plant or a tree blossoms, we see new flowers. But we can also use this verb to mean to develop in a good way. So we might say, their simple idea blossomed into a very successful business. The small seaside town has blossomed into the country's most popular beach resort. Number 9, excruciating. Excruciating means something is really bad, very negative. The most common use for this word is to describe very serious pain. For example, I tried to move my leg, but the pain was excruciating. He felt an excruciating pain in his back. Number 10, spark our interest. I think we've seen this expression before, but let's look at it again. Remember, repeating vocabulary is the best way to remember it. If something sparks your interest, it makes you very interested. It gets your attention. The recent news article has sparked the interest of many readers. The readers became very interested in the article. His recently published book has really sparked widespread interest in the subject. Okay, now we can quickly look at the article. I think we already understand the main idea from the story at the beginning of today's episode, but let's have a quick look at the article. The title, Why We Snap Judge Some People as Boring. So, why do we make quick decisions about people without thinking carefully? So the article begins, according to recent research, people have many preconceptions of what features make up a stereotypical bore. So, researchers have discovered that we have fixed and often incorrect ideas about what a typical boring person is like. Like other types of stereotyping, these biases may not be objectively true, but they come with extremely negative consequences. So, this means these ideas that we have are often incorrect, and thinking in this way can have some very negative effects, maybe in our social life. The article continues. People judge those who match boring stereotypes harshly. We treat those people badly, considering them less competent and warm, so we see them as less nice than the average person, and unfairly shunning, avoiding them in social interactions before they have even opened their mouths. So, when we have an idea that someone is boring, even if our idea is wrong, we still treat that person badly or unfairly. We avoid them. We don't want to talk to them, just like Jane, who works in a bank. Then we get a quote from the researcher. He says, they're marginalized. This is the experimental psychologist. So the person who did this research says these people become marginalized. We see them as not important, and so therefore we ignore them. The article continues. By entering an encounter with unduly negative expectations, you may end up missing out on a potentially enjoyable conversation, whereas a more open mind might allow a budding friendship to blossom. So, when we meet these people, we have these negative ideas. We are biased. We might be wrong. Maybe these people are really interesting. We might be losing the chance to make a good new friend. Then the article tells us the research can also offer some tips for making a better first impression of yourself. So we can also think about how we start conversations, how we can show others that we are interesting. Then the article continues. Van Tilburg's research builds on more than 2 decades of scientific interest in people's experiences of boredom. This research has shown it is one of our most excruciating emotions, our most painful emotions, with a surprisingly profound influence on our behaviour. So, to say that in a simple way, this kind of research has been continuing for more than 20 years by other people. The research tells us that our experience of boredom, dealing with boring situations, is one of our most negative emotions. We feel quite strongly about this. And then at the end of the article, unfortunately, humans have an annoying tendency to unfairly prejudge people based on incomplete information. And this means that we will often decide that someone is going to be a bore before they have even had a chance to spark our interest. So the bad news is that we continue to judge others on small pieces of information. We often decide that someone is a bore even before we give them a chance, even before we find out what they are really like. Okay, that's the end of today's article. We have 2 listener questions. First of all, listener Emma asked, the plural form of words ending in TAH. Mouth, mouths. Clothes, months. How can we pronounce this difficult sound? Okay, now this is a good question, Emma. Let's use clothes as our example because it's a common word and we need to use it quite often. I'm going to buy some new clothes. Have you washed my clothes yet? I need some new summer clothes. So clothes. The most common problem is when students add an extra sound. Many students say closes, and this can be quite confusing because it sounds like the verb to close. The shop closes at 6. So, we need to improve this sound. The standard way to practice these sounds is just with a th, clothes, and then a z, z. So it's kind of like one short sound. It's not easy, but if you practice it enough, you will get it right. Listen. Z, clothes, clothes, clothes. So it's the z, clothes, mouths. Now, if you really have problems, there is a way to cheat. Now, in London, the local London accent, well, many people don't use the sound v, and they use a v sound. Very, v. It's like a lazy way to say it. Now listen, if I change the sound to a v, vz, cloves, cloves. Now, actually, it's not the standard correct way to say it, but if you change the th, v, to a v, cloves. I want to buy some new clothes. Have you cleaned my clothes yet? Have you washed my clothes yet? That actually sounds like someone from London. So, that's the easy way to pronounce those sounds. Now, one more quick question. Listener Nina asked, what's the difference between fill out and fill in? Now, these 2 verbs mean exactly the same thing. The only difference is fill in is more common in British English, but we still fill out forms sometimes in British English. And in American English, they fill out forms more than they fill in forms, but they still use fill in sometimes. So the simple answer, British English, fill in, American English, fill out. The meaning is exactly the same. Okay, that brings me to the end of today's episode. Thanks very much for listening. I'll be back next week with more. Until then, this is me, Matt Clark, saying goodbye. Goodbye. Now, where am I going? I need to go and tell video game designer Alice that she really does need to find some interesting hobbies. Otherwise, I'll never talk to her again.